Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining. It looks like attendees are flowing in. So we will give everyone a minute or two to get started. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. We have a number of attendees still joining, so we're going to give everyone a minute or two before we get started, probably kicking off 1 minute to 2 minutes after the hour. Thank you very much for joining today's session. We're excited for the conversation ahead. All right, the stream of attendees is still flowing in. So we'll give probably another 20-30 seconds here, and then we'll get started. Thank you for joining. Starting off here in probably another 20-30 seconds, 2 minutes after the hour, and then we will jump into today's conversation. All right, we are 2 minutes past the hour and the attendees are still joining and the number is still going up, but we're going to go ahead and get started. With that, I'd like to just thank everyone that's joined for tuning into today's session. We're excited for the conversation ahead and to answer any questions that you have. On that note, please make sure that you use the Q&A icon in the Zoom panel to submit questions to the team here. We have time at the end of today's session to answer any questions that come in, and we're excited to get to those at the end of the time together. To answer the inevitable question, yes, this is being recorded, and by registering for the event, you will receive that recording after the session. So really excited to get this into everyone's hands. For today, I'm going to do a quick round of introductions, and then we will go through the agenda. Introduce myself. My name is George Baines. I've been with OpenAsset for 7 years and have been in my current role as VP of Customer Success and Growth for almost 3 years now. I lead our customer-facing teams, and I'm focused on ensuring that our clients have the tools that they need and the top quality customer experience to really make sure they're getting the value that they expect out of OpenAsset and partnering with us for the long haul. So with that, I will kick it over to Chris to introduce himself.
Yeah, hey, thanks for having me. I'm Chris Parsons, founder and CEO of Knowledge Architecture. Started the company in 2009 and now spend the vast majority of my time designing Synthesis, which is our software platform, and doing marketing. And then I also produce KA Connect, which is our annual knowledge management conference for the AEC industry. So excited to be here, and I will turn it over to Schmidt, starting with Libby.
All right, my name is Libby Budak. I'm the data specialist at Schmidt Associates and been here for about 6 years. And I'm the administrator for our Deltek Vantage Point ERP, as well as our Cal company intranet, which is built on Synthesis. And I do everything data and reporting for Schmidt Associates with Power BI and other tools. And over to Karen.
Hi, I'm Karen Gilmore. I'm a senior graphic designer at Schmidt Associates. Been here a little over 2.5 years. Before that, I was with another firm in the same industry for over 20 years. So a lot of experience with all things marketing and proposals in the AEC world, and heavy user of OpenAsset and Cal on a daily basis. Greg?
I'm Greg Hempstead, Project Delivery Systems Manager here at Schmidt. Been working here about 25 years and currently work in our quality management, process development, and staff training efforts.
Excellent. Thanks everyone for introducing yourselves. As we look at today's agenda, we will do a quick overview of each of our companies, each organization. We're going to do a demo of how OpenAsset and Synthesis for Schmidt, they call it CAL, how OpenAsset and CAL interact and how the teams use both platforms. Then we'll get into a panel discussion, a lot of exciting content around the culture of knowledge sharing that's been built at Schmidt and how they use that to improve their project storytelling internally and externally. Then we'll get into Q&A. So with that, I will hand back to Greg to introduce Schmidt.
Okay, Schmidt Associates is a women-owned business. We are a full-service architecture engineering firm with 2 offices, one in Indianapolis and one in Louisville. We have a number of different studios in community, healthcare, higher education, and K-12. And the firm was founded on the principle of servant leadership, where we lead a design process kind of based in mutual respect and shared investment with our owners.
Yeah, so knowledge architecture, we were built specifically for the AEC industry. We're an intranet and AI search platform, and we've got over 150 customers running on our platform, which is an AEC intranet. We can go to the next slide, if you will. So one of the big things that makes Synthesis special is our integrations with AEC specific software like OpenAsset, Deltek, Uninet, and so on, many, many more. We've also just been proud to be partners with OpenAsset since they came to America in 2009. So right when they were coming to the US, we got started and we've been working together ever since. So excited to be here today.
And OpenAsset, at its core, is a digital asset management solution built exclusively for the AEC industry. Our clients use OpenAsset to store projects, employees, boilerplate text, all of the files associated with those objects, and then use OpenAsset to get that content out into marketing workflows. So by storing and organizing content, being able to then translate that into proposals, website management, sharing for press releases, using OpenAsset really as a core hub of digital assets that are used across marketing, AEC marketing workflows. We have roughly 1,000 clients, been around for a little over 20 years, and have a long-standing partnership with KA and Schmidt Associates as well. And so really excited to be leading the conversation today around how our platforms all connect. As we get ready to get into today's session, as I mentioned, we'll be doing a quick demo. So we'll hand off here for Karen to run through using OpenAsset, and then she'll kick over to Libby for the Synthesis Cal workflow.
Thanks, George. So I'm just going to quickly run through some of the features in OpenAsset that we use on a daily basis that kind of help us do our jobs more efficiently. The first thing you'll see is the OpenAsset home screen, where you can quickly just do a keyword search, or you can search for a particular client or project name and find information that way. The other thing that is fairly new in OpenAsset, which we'll talk a little bit more about later, is this AI search. So it's a quick way to search for something that you might not have specific information on, like blue stairs, and it will pull up any image that is showing both stairs and the color blue. So that has come in handy a few times for reasons you might not even think of off the top of your head. As we go into projects, on the projects tab, you can see all of the projects we have loaded to OpenAsset right now. You can filter by project number, project name, or if you wanted to drill down into specific services, facility types, project types. All of that is information that we have customized for our page, but you can do set up however you like for your page. So then as we go into a specific project, right here I have this Heritage Hills pulled up, You can see how using the Deltek Vantage Point integration, you can see everything is pulling in directly from there. So you have descriptions, you have details about the project, you have keywords, and you have everyone who has worked on that project. All of the files that we have loaded to the project, you can see here. And if you go into those, you can see that we have all of these ranked as professional marketing photography. There are different levels. So if you wanted to have just some general site photographs, you could load those and they would have a different ranking level. And you can quickly see whether an image is approved or if it needs marketing approval to use. We also use the built-in template system. So we have created a few templates for project pages that spit out into InDesign. And I will show that here. You just have to be in the project and click on the proposal, generate the document. And then it will go to your downloads. And when you open it in InDesign, you can see that it's already set up exactly how we would need to use it in a proposal. And if there's an image that we want to switch out, you can use the easy drag and drop feature from OpenAsset to just change those out. Jumping back to OpenAsset, we also have the Employees tab up here where you can see all of our employees. And as you go into a particular person, again, this is all pulling from Vantage Point. So it has all of the details, all of their photos, all the projects they've worked on. And if you wanted to create a resume quickly for someone, you would do it the same way. We have several versions created for us, but I will go with the resume full page, where you can see that it's pulling up all the projects she's worked on. If you have particular projects that you want to use, you can filter them by project name. You can also see the number of hours that has been billed to each project to kind of know which ones are the most pertinent. And then for this particular template, I know that we have 4 project spots open. So just picking 4, generate a document. And then it opens in our resume template. Everything's already created for us and we can just pull that into our proposal file. So just a quick overview, and with that, I will turn it over to Libby.
Thank you, Karen. I'm going to proceed from there and show how all the wonderful information in OpenAsset that marketing puts there translates over to our synthesis intranet, also known as CAL here. Here you can see the home page, and just as a quick overview of how that navigates, along the top we have our community tabs, which are these fold downs, people in office, and so on. And then here in the center left, we have a news feed that highlights various posts from staff and some automated posts that come in as well from OpenAsset, which I will be showing, and then some quick links along the side for commonly used applications. One of the big things is project information and project photography. So I'm going to flip over to the project directory within CAL. And this is the grid view of that directory. And you can see anything we filtered to has an OpenAsset record. So that could include project photography. Some of these that may not have a hero image assigned are assessments. We use OpenAsset to organize our assessment photos as well. So you can kind of see here hero images, like a brief overview of the project name and number. So if you were to click over to a different view, Synthesis actually has a map view. So you're getting the same information, but it's on a map overlaid and it's interactive. So you can see counts of projects on the screen. If you were to zoom in, it's reactive and also changes the project directory on the right-hand side to correspond with what is shown on the map. So it's a quick and easy way to see geographically where the project is. As long as it's got a location within Deltek Vantage Point, all of that information comes over into CAL as well. And if you were to click on one of these project profiles, you would get something along these lines. You would get OpenAsset photos right here in the center with a slideshow that you can just start to filter through and look through project photos that way, along with any posts that might mention that project, whether it's an automated post from OpenAsset or a post from a staff member that mentioned the project, and then employees that, of course, worked on the project, very similar to what OpenAsset was showing directly from Vantage Point. You've got project basic information as well as a mini map as long as the location is there. And then project partners and contacts, anyone that's on the record within Vantage Point that we may have worked with on the project. And then if you want to go straight there, there are project links at the bottom to go straight to that record in OpenAsset or Deltek Vantage Point. Moving along to something else you can do with project directories. We've got a couple of pages built out for our studios. So for example, this is our community studio overview. It's got a description of that studio, a mini news feed of any posts that mention the community studio, along with profiles of the studio leaders on the right, and then a mini directory of community projects. So it's all kind of right there as a good overview of what that studio is working on and doing. And we've got a page for each of those within Cal. And next, I'm just looking at here like a section of a news feed in our projects and practice area. And you can see here in an example of what's pulling over from OpenAsset. So whenever marketing uploads photos to OpenAsset tagged appropriately, those will filter over automatically into Cal/Synthesis and show up on the newsfeed. So when people are scrolling through the newsfeed, looking through posts or information, they can find those photos immediately and they come up. So if you click on this post, you can see, just like the project profile, it's got a slideshow that you can immediately move through. It gets engagement. People like the post. You can see here 8 people have liked this post. So it's getting eyes on any project photography we're doing. And you can even comment on that down there at the bottom. So sometimes other disciplines will comment, people will give each other kudos, which is really great to see because, you know, they're all working on different projects. And so they get to see an example of what else is going on in the firm. And then last but not least, we have the AI search function, which is fairly recent to Synthesis/Cal. And you can just ask it a natural language question or do a search for information and it will give you a search summary right off the top. So for example, I put in one of our projects, the IMS Museum Remodel project information. It gave me a nice summary of, you know, the project name and number, how it was being managed and constructed and designed, and all of the key dates and things like that, as well as the results that is pulling from. Along the right-hand side, you can see it's got the project records, some PDFs from marketing and business development, as well as, you know, a post or two that mention the project. And you can, of course, go to view all results to see what else is pulling from. And if you're looking for more information on the project, you can find it all in one place. And that's proven to be very useful because, again, everyone's getting used to AI and all of their applications. So it's been really helpful in synthesis as well. And I'll pass it back to George.
Excellent. Thank you, Karen and Libby, for those great explanations of how your teams are using OpenAsset and Synthesis. As we get into the panel discussion, I'm not going to reshare my screen. We're going to just keep faces up so we can all talk through a number of things around the story of how Schmidt Associates has, you know, integrated these two tools to improve the way that they operate as a practice. As we get into the discussion, I want to start by posing a question to Greg. Greg, you know, we just saw the benefits of having integrated systems like OpenAsset and Synthesis, the connected project and employee information, the ability to share firm-wide knowledge in a visual way, but that hasn't always been the case. So the question to you is, you know, before implementing knowledge architecture, Synthesis, and OpenAsset, what were your biggest challenges in managing project information, imagery, and firm-wide knowledge?
Right. It was a lot less efficient, I would say. We've always been pretty process driven and data driven with our efforts, and so we were doing a lot of the same things, but we were doing it on disconnected systems. So at the time, we were using Deltek Vantage, or we were using Deltek Vision. We were using Word docs in order to store our proposal language. We were using Flickr to store our content. And as we transferred data between those systems, it was a manual process where we would be, you know, recreating keywords inside Flickr in order to make the search more available there. We also had a SharePoint for our intranet website, and so there was a lot of rework there. just really the lack of centralization of that made it more difficult to know what resource to use in order to get to the information, and it made it more difficult to really figure out what you needed to correct in order to get people the information that they needed at a timely manner.
Greg, I think it's interesting. You know, we've talked a few times in preparation for this, and I hadn't drawn this connection until right now. You started by talking about disconnected systems. And one thing that we talked about with this group is that going back 7, 8 years, like marketing and operations, like it wasn't always so collaborative as it is today. It was a little bit more disconnected. So you kind of had disconnected systems and disconnected departments a little bit, and you've connected systems, but it's also brought your departments, you know, closer together. And I'm curious if you can kind of talk about, you know, how that happened.
Yeah, and I think this is probably the case for a lot of firms where there is kind of a natural disconnect between the marketing department and operations in terms of people selling the work and the people doing it. And so I think that has always been a challenge for us. But I think once we started to connect these systems, it really gave us a project that we could work on together. We could have common goals between operations and marketing, and just really find opportunities to make each department aware of the efforts others were doing. So once you connect these systems, it gives you the opportunity to expose some of those efforts, check it, and then make people more aware of some of the things that are happening kind of on the fly, as you saw with, you know, Libby's demonstration of showing, yeah, the images that are getting posted, and then even construction imagery and that kind of thing that happens in the activity feed and synthesis. Marketing gets to see that, and they can tune in to where there's activity on projects. So.
Libby, I think you kind of had played a role as kind of a, like you kind of personify the connection in any way between a kind of connecting the business a little bit. I wonder if you can talk about that.
Yeah, so just interestingly, my degree is in marketing, but I'm in data and systems and reporting. But I think it just so happened that when I got here, we were ramping up the synthesis, I guess, rollout, so that, you know, I could kind of be the go-between, understanding what marketing needs might have been, and then, you know, being able to translate that into our, you know, data needs in our team, so that we could kind of get on the same page. So, you know, it was a good opportunity for us to, like Greg said, to get on a similar project together, have similar goals, and yeah, just kind of make a transition between operations and marketing, because they both need the data, right? They just were going about it in different ways because they were just used to going about it in different ways.
Yeah, you know, that I think is having those connected tools, having a connected tech stack is certainly one of the benefits of tools like Deltek, knowledge architecture, OpenAsset. When you have data that can flow across multiple tools, it does pull teams together, because there's more of a reliance and collaboration between the different teams that touch different parts of a project in a way that really leads to a connected business outcome. You know, posing a question to you, Karen, you know, Greg and Libby just talked about like how collaboration has been able to improve within Schmidt Associates as data, or as the tools have been implemented and put into place. I'm wondering if you can speak to how these tools have changed the way that, you know, graphics and marketing are accessing and utilizing project imagery and data in your workflows around winning more business, and using, you know, the visual side of OpenAsset and knowledge architecture to do that.
Yeah, so that collaboration has played a big role in us being able to trust that the data that's in the systems is accurate. Before, we would also get a lot of random requests from people for various project images. So this has allowed them to go in and kind of search for them themselves and be able to pick out exactly what they need for their particular circumstance. Excuse me. And just being able to access all of the images quickly has been big. Before, you know, if we were trying to access a bunch of images through the network, across the network, either not so much in the office, but if you're working from home, it would be kind of slow to load. So these, all appear instantaneously, and it's just a lot quicker to get to what we need, which helps us perform more efficiently.
Yeah, I definitely understand. I remember, this time 5 years ago, the number of clients that kind of came forward and were like, hey, we've been on a network and we have to get faster access to these things. And that shift, I think, really accelerated 5 years ago. I mean, it's been in motion for 20 plus years, but in the last 5 years, I real focus on how do we make sure there's faster access to all the information and content that OpenAsset and Synthesis store. Back to you, Karen, are there any specific examples that you can share around how the tools have reduced manual requests, improved proposal creation, or help different roles from operations to marketing work more efficiently?
Yeah, so several examples. As you saw in the demo, the resume and project page templates have been huge. Just being able to integrate them with Vantage Point, huge time saver there. You can also do multiples of those at the same time just by selecting several people at once and then making your selections for each individual, and then it spits them all out together. So that's been nice. We use the PowerPoint integration to create videos for trade show displays. New staff are able to quickly verify which projects are correct for a particular pursuit that we're going after. If someone says use XYZ project, they can feel comfortable knowing that they've pulled up the right project and that they're using the right images that are already pre-approved. Our principals and project managers are able to kind of better articulate which images they're wanting us to use for a particular pursuit because they can see everything at a quick glance and see all the information for each. And probably just the text library within OpenAsset, we've started using that to replace some of the Word documents that we've been pulling info from. So that's been a neat feature as well.
I'm looking over at the, thank you, Karen. That's really cool. I'm looking over at the chat or the Q&A, and there's a lot of questions around process. So, technology is great. I love synthesis, obviously. Love what OpenAsset's doing. But there's a lot more than just technology to being successful with the information and the knowledge we're talking about. But we always talk about knowledge management as being people, process, and technology. So let's talk about the people and process piece a little bit in terms of like how your teams collaborate to get high quality, accurate data. So not just the initial launch of these platforms, but then how do you sustain data quality, over time?
We have someone on our marketing team whose job it is to reach out at various touch points throughout a project to verify that the information we've already collected is up to date and current, as well as gaining new information from projects that we don't have any information for yet. So having that system in place allows us to keep the information updated, and of course working with Libby and Greg for the information that they input on their side is extremely helpful.
I guess I'd chime in here and talk a little bit about some of the quality assurance processes that we have along the way throughout design. And we try to daylight this information as much as we can. So because it's the same information being synchronized across multiple systems, we can actually use these systems in our meetings and our checkpoints and our quality gates, expose that and verify that the information is being entered along the way. So I think one of the traditional pain points really when it comes to some of these questions that were in the chat is that oftentimes people are being asked for information over and over again. And so there's a huge incentive for the operations staff. If they can just enter it once in the right place and have it show up everywhere, then that's huge. I don't think you have to do much more than that if you can just assure them that if they put it in the right place, it'll end up there.
And then on the other side of that, like, for example, in Vantage Point, we use a lot of workflows. So for example, when marketing needs a pursuit project entered, the stakeholders of that project will get an email saying, hey, these key fields need to be filled out. So we try to start at the beginning and get people to say, hey, this is the piece of the project that I know about, and then get that process started from there. One thing we also do is quarterly content reviews in Cal, so that people can trust that when they're going into Cal, they know that content has been updated and reviewed. And funny enough, that also drives people to say, hey, this information needs an update. So sometimes organically people will notice, either a piece of their, employee data that's in there for their profile or project data. Sometimes it just organically comes up, and they have a way to see that data in front of them on a regular basis. And then they'll come to us and, help us get that, data structured the way it should be, or up to date. So, we use a kind of a, I guess, a balanced approach to doing that. And then, we're always trying to get better, of course.
Yeah, one of the ways you guys talked about getting better, Greg, you touched on a little bit, was this daylighting was a term that kept coming up over and over again. So, right, a lot of people work in, the marketing team works in OpenAsset, and by daylighting all that kind of historically marketing information to the whole firm via Cal, you get more eyes on it to build higher quality. But the other thing you touched on is stories. So it starts with some of that integration, right, of pulling in new images into the intranet, but you're also writing stories and talking about project stories, on Cal. And this kind of, I think what we had talked about in our previous conversations, this kind of virtuous cycle starts where people are sharing stories, data's available, it brings more users. So they share more stories, which engages more users, and you kind of get this virtual cycle going. So I wonder if you can talk a little bit about how you're using kind of project data and project stories to attract and engage employees into your kind of knowledge management approach.
From a marketing standpoint, I think it's been extremely helpful just being able to see things that people have posted on Cal, being able to reach out to them and maybe create a social media post from that information or something along those lines. The project map that you saw Libby show in Cal has been huge for proposals. We're able to tell a story using the data that's shown in the map about how we work in a certain area, how many projects we've done in a certain area. So a lot of collaboration between those two.
And one thing I try to do, I don't know if this is the right spot to interject this, but I just kind of had a thought at the top of my head. Every time we bring in a new hire, since we got Synthesis, I walk them through a more in-depth session similar to the demo I did today. But that way, as we're bringing new people in, they already know this tool is here, and this is the type of information that I can find, and they can engage with it right away, and then become part of that virtuous cycle where they're giving us information too as feedback, so that we can improve that as well.
Yeah, I love that.
There's, as Chris mentioned, there's a lot of questions in the Q&A about, milestones in the project lifecycle. Where do you capture data, all that. One comment that I saw, and something that I can say from my experience at OpenAsset is, when you go to implement a technology, I'm sure everyone else on the panel here would agree, when you go to implement technology, you do identify gaps in data, right? That is part of the daylighting experiences. It's not just bringing light to all of the really good data that teams collect, but it's also identifying those gaps. And while navigating through those gaps can be challenging, the number of times that I've spoken with firms that have come on board with OpenAsset and implemented and said, without this exercise, we would never have so much clarity around where we have to get better in managing data. That is a very real sentiment across clients. No client of ours has ever come and had perfect data. Chris, I'm sure it's the same on your side, and finding the right way to connect teams around those gaps in data is something that is probably unique to every firm. But when we get into the Q&A piece, maybe Libby, Karen, Greg, we can speak to that a little bit more, because that seems to be the biggest theme here in the Q&A. So I definitely want to make sure that we touch on that in a little bit here. But to come back to kind of where Libby just left the conversation, saying we have this ability to help tell the story to new team members as they come in to Schmidt Associates because of the tools on hand. You're creating this community space for firm practitioners to engage. Karen, Libby, Greg, question to anyone here. Having that data is helpful. Having a visual experience, having a place where people can come in and not just see, this is the name of the project or this is how we worked on it, but the visual that actually really brings that project to life. Those visuals live in OpenAsset and flow into Synthesis. Talk to us a little bit about how what role those visuals play in driving the firm-wide adoption and participation in this community space that you've created.
I think it's been helpful from a marketing standpoint to have all that information together, either in OpenAsset or as it flows into Cal, but being able to go into a particular project and see all of the project images with the description so that you can start to kind of think about which images you want to show based off what story you want to tell about a project. Or with a person, being able to see that they have the right qualifications that match up with the right project, or they have the right experience listed. So I think definitely having it all in one place is super helpful.
Excellent.
I mean, I can speak to just like personal experience. I'm on the data side of things, and I'm not out there working on projects. Once in a while, maybe I get to work with a project team, but just being able to see the visuals of stuff that we're doing out there in the world all the time, just as a user of the system, it makes me engage with it more. I want to see what we're doing and the interesting things that sometimes you'll just hear about, in passing. But just, as a consumer of that information, it makes you want to click on it, so it's always there because you always want to go toward, for example, a post with a picture than something without a picture. So for me as a user, it's been really cool. And I think that is happening around the firm. So people are going to want to engage with that because especially with Synthesis, it's such a great layout, especially the news feeds. People are used to, liking and commenting on things. So it's very, accessible to them and they're used to engaging with content that way. So I like that part of it.
I think, George, if I could just chime in on that for a minute, because we talked about this with Schmidt, like when we designed that feature to automatically bring images into the newsfeed, one of the reasons we did it was to get visibility onto the non-hero images for the project. So a lot of times in those slideshows that, Libby had shown, you'll find really interesting images that somebody will ask a question about. They're like, what was slide 9? What is that thing? Maybe it doesn't get marketed or published as much, but it's still an interesting part of the design. So you get kind of a wider lens into what's happening.
Might be able to chime in a little bit here too, and kind of going back to the virtuous cycle. We've got one of our design principals does a Throwback Thursday post every Thursday. He'll post images, sometimes from OpenAsset, sometimes just from the old project record, archived photos and that type of thing. But it gives him an easy way to expose some of that information that may be on OpenAsset, find those images, get them up there. And then I think sometimes with older historical projects, that kind of thing, or legacy projects, maybe he's got access to images that marketing could then upload into the content management system. So it kind of works both ways. And then that engages people, and that's what gets people coming back. So it's not just a bunch of project data. It is information that's kind of relevant to people's lives.
Yeah, that's awesome. I know the visual side of it really makes a difference. It does draw people in, especially when you're doing good, really intriguing, cool work. It's not all the same, and being able to see everything from, a healthcare facility to an education facility, the details do matter, and they do draw people in. We are about 5 to 10 more minutes of discussion here, and I know that as we get towards the end, one of the things that everybody is talking about right now is AI. We have built a number of AI related features into OpenAsset, from AI visual search to content assist, similarity search. There's a number of ways that you can find AI in OpenAsset. I know Chris and team have recently released, the AI searching within Synthesis as well, and really looking to daylight more content there. So want to start with the question with really saying, like, love to hear from the Schmidt Associates team. How is AI evolving the adoption of these two platforms? Yeah, and we'll start there and tee up with that on in regards to OpenAsset.
For marketing in OpenAsset, we've been able to use the AI feature in searching, like I showed a little bit in the demo, just being able to go in. Somebody had a random project they were trying to think of, and they're like, I know that I've seen a picture of a project that, had a blue stairs. Like it's an easy way to find that rather than trying to rack our brains trying to remember what project it was. It also will let us create AI generated project descriptions for projects and for employee bios as well. And they might not be perfect right off the bat, but they're a great starting point to kind of get you something to modify and perfect.
Well, as far as the synthesis AI search, we rolled that out firm-wide not long ago. And we've, definitely had people who are likely to engage in, rating the search and giving us feedback on it. Those people have been in there doing that. But mostly I think it's gone really well because, as I use it, I find that it's, fairly accurate with regard to what's in there. And the places where it isn't, we're finding those as, people highlight sometimes just basic stuff that we wouldn't have thought to go back and check during, like, say, a quarterly content review. So it's been nice to help have that as kind of a tool to fill in, where gaps might be or where content might exist that we don't know is out there that people are still referencing. So, or at least from my perspective, it's been really good to help, get some of that stuff cleaned up.
It feels like we're back to daylighting again, right? Except this time it's AI search versus a different integration, but that's more eyes on the data. I think our last question I get to ask, which is nice. One of the things we've been talking about on this call is knowledge management. That's something our company's passionate. Obviously, we named the company Knowledge Architecture. Like, we think it's an important thing. And kind of my view is all firms are doing knowledge management, AEC firms, whether they call it that or not. But Schmidt is intentional about it and has been on a knowledge management journey for several years. And I'm wondering if you can share some thoughts about, or lessons, things you wish you'd known about knowledge management when you got started to help folks that are kind of getting more up to speed or hearing about knowledge management for the first time.
Let's say one tip from the marketing side is when we first got OpenAsset, everyone just dumped every image that we had for every project in there. And so recently we spent a lot of time going through and cleaning that back up because there's some images that didn't necessarily need to be in there. So kind of think through the plan beforehand before you start uploading things. Kind of think about how you want to organize, think about how you want it ranked and the keywords that you want to use, all that kind of stuff. Think that through beforehand, have a good plan in place rather than just going to an immediate dump.
I think knowledge architecture has been doing this, for quite some time, and they're really instrumental, I think, in helping us to prepare and kind of take everything step by step. So, you're not trying to bite off the whole thing at once. You're just, as far as project data goes, that's kind of how you have to approach it too. Just take, small steps, just get like, the basics of a project before you try to get, everything from construction costs, completion dates and all of that. So, I think in our discussions we had talked about starting small, but yeah, it's step by step, and eventually you'll get to a good place with it.
And then I would say, just getting firm-wide buy-in, making sure that leadership is on board with the effort. I think that's part of, the technology is pretty well sorted out. I think we had a lot of processes in place, and so it was a challenge to connect those, but that was a positive thing. But really, the people side of thing is getting leadership on board, making sure they understand their role and making it successful and establishing expectations. And I would say that's another thing that knowledge architecture actually did a good job, is really engaging firm leadership in the project plan as we were implementing these, because we implemented both synthesis and OpenAsset at the same time as a part of that plan in order to clean things up and streamline our process.
How did you, going back, we'll take the compliment. Thank you, Greg. Going back to that kind of 2017-ish era where you guys were making this change, right? Kind of more disconnected departments working together, disconnected systems working together, investing in new technology as well as new process to help really get more intentional about your knowledge. How did you get leadership buy-in to like make that investment, both technology and in process and people, right? Libby joined the firm also. What was it that you like helped them convince that this will make us better if we do this?
I think it came back to, I think leadership had a history and really trusting data and trying to get good data in there. And I think through our trials and tribulations doing that and making sure that was good, I think that was a big motivator for them. But to be able to elevate the conversation and make it more of a social effort and a multi disciplinary or departmental effort, I think those are the things that really kind of got them on board. But you have to elevate the conversation to actually address their pain points, right? And then we can come up with some good technical solutions that help connect people.
That's right. George, do you have any your eye on any questions in the Q&A?
Yeah, I think this has been a really good discussion and really appreciate even there at the end, Greg, talking about making sure that leadership buys in because you're solving a pain point for them, right? Like every time you're implementing a technology solution, it should be solving a specific pain point because that's how you really address the buy-in. I think, I'm looking at a couple of these questions and I know we could check probably 3 or 4 of them off with a variety of a blended question here. So I'm going to actually pose this to Libby. The question that I'm going to choose to read is one of our biggest challenges is getting complete, compelling project, this says descriptions, I'm going to say project data into Deltek from the production team. Can you share how you're tackling that? And I think that when I think of the best approach, like knowing this question from 100 different firms on any given basis, like it's really where in the process, right? Like where in the process are you sitting down with who to gather a piece of information to put into a system? If you can share any of that, Libby or Karen, would love to have that answered.
I think it's always an ongoing process, but a couple of the things that we do, for example, is we have a monthly report that, aggregates all of our corporate KPIs. So it's something that we measure in the firm. For example, on the marketing side, as far as project descriptions go, if marketing is highlighting a project and Vantage Point for, being a key project and they enter a project description that goes through our database and we actually score that on how we're doing, and marketing, kind of sets that bar for themselves on the marketing side. On operations, it's a little more kind of just, I think there's a role, and Greg can probably speak to this a little bit more, but I think that on each project there's a BIM coordinator, and I think we're trying to use them as well as a resource on the project side to get that data management kind of going from the get-go. So for example, and again, Greg has more information on this, but we use project gates, which are kind of like check-ins and things to actually drive some of that engagement and process.
Right. So those are things that that's ever evolving on our balance scorecard, as putting the carrot out in front of people to get good scores on entering square footage information, cost information for estimates, as well as bid numbers that are coming in. So identifying what some of those key pieces of data are, measuring success on that, and then integrating that into our quality control process helps us kind of build that information throughout design. And then we do the quality control at the marketing side at project closeout, just to make sure everything's there. We found some success there.
Can I ask a follow-up question? Just because, again, thinking about, for the audience here, like, it sounds to me like you have a field in Deltek that indicates if a project is a key project, and then you're running a report that has maybe 10 other fields on it and says, hey, for all projects that are marked as a key project, here's the data gaps. Is that correct? Is that a correct assumption?
Yeah, so going back to the days of Deltek Vision, that that Deltek has always been our source of truth for project information, and that continues to be the case. That is a one-way connection out of Deltek into both OpenAsset as well as Synthesis, and so you can review that information there to see if it's present or not, but really to make sure everything is in those fields and that they're connected properly, when we set up the system initially, is the key to being able to check it.
I'd say,
Greg, oh, sorry, go ahead, Libby.
I was just going to say, as just like a PS, is, Vantage Point has some dashboards and things that you can build in it now. So with Vantage Point, you can build, for example, a dashboard that just highlights any field that's empty, and you could potentially push that out to a project manager. So we're kind of working on that side of it too, to put it right in front of them and say, hey, here's gaps in your projects.
Yeah, I mean, actually, that's kind of where I was heading a little bit. Greg, you kind of went past balanced scorecards pretty quickly, but I think that's an interesting thing for this audience to hear. I'm going to tell you what I think you mean, and what I think you mean, right, is you have KPIs or key performance indicators across the business on a variety of different things. It sounds like one of those KPIs is how well are project teams getting their data, key, like most important metrics, made available, and leadership sees those balanced scorecards. So getting project data seems like it rolls up through these balanced scorecards to the leadership of the company. Is that,
Yep.
Do I have that right?
It's true. And I think we go a little beyond that because we share our balance scorecard with the entire staff. We use Power BI and our KA Synthesis website in order to expose that to all staff, so everybody sees it. And then I guess the other thing with a balance scorecard, the balance is really the effort between operations and marketing, the internal effort as well as the external effort. So making sure that operations is giving marketing what marketing needs and vice versa.
So it's an accountability mechanism in
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Great. That takes care of one of our questions, is from Chen, does the marketing department the de facto data department? And what I'm hearing in this conversation is that's not right. It's like,
it needs to be both. Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. We have three. I'm going to try and do a George Baines and go for a 3-for-1 here. There are three kind of versions of how long did it take you to get Synthesis, OpenAsset, like this whole kind of inner working system, kind of like from start to launch. We talked to some about maintenance, but how long did it take you to get up and running, and how did that work?
Oh, wow, going on the Wayback Machine here. We were engaged with knowledge architecture for quite some time, actually, before we ended up pulling the trigger and buying their product, Synthesis. So there was a number of years where we're getting familiar with the ideology and just engaged with their knowledge management community, which has been good. The product implementation came later. I think we started maybe planning that effort. Maybe there was 9 to 6 months worth of planning where we were working with knowledge architecture on a plan to go live. And then when we started implementing the plan, it was probably a 3 or 4 month effort where we were getting the different connections made that needed to be made across systems. So really determining what data from Vision at the time needed to be connected. And largely those connections have been maintained over the years between Deltek, Synthesis, Nuforma was another place where information was coming from initially, and then OpenAsset. I think OpenAsset was a little bit delayed, maybe a couple months after our initial Synthesis implementation, and that ended up being pretty seamless once we did that.
Very cool. I'll share a link about our ideology in the chat.
And I think just a question that landed in the chat around metadata, right? Talk about how these images are tagged with keywords. How does marketing person know how to identify specific material or application if one is not a designer? Is there collaboration? I'm gonna answer this real quick from a OpenAsset internal kind of talking point and tidbit of information, and then I'll tee it up to Karen and see maybe if there's additional context that she wants to provide around how they've gone about cleaning up keywords and making sure that people can find things correctly. But to answer that question first, I would say we've actually just released AI visual search. AI visual search, while someone may say it is not AEC specific language, I would say AEC language is natural language, and AI visual search is a natural language search tool. So in OpenAsset, you can search for things that include specific materials or applications, and it's not just searching for blue stairs, although I no doubt know somebody remembers the picture of blue stairs and they want you to find that same one every time, Karen. But the AI visual search enables you to search for content based on how you would describe it, based on the words that describe what is there. That is an AI model trade off of 400+ million images. So that is not a small knowledge set. And the goal of that is to reduce the need to have very specific keywords that your team is tagging and applying to every image that gets uploaded. It reduces the work side of managing images and surfaces things more easily. Hopefully that helps. And Karen, to you on the marketing side, how do you think about making sure you have the right keywords if you're continuing to maintain those versus leaning into the AI search and other things?
So I can actually glean a lot of the keywords from what's already been entered in Vantage Point. Things like, what services, what markets, then we have a keyword set that's, is it a photo? Is it a aerial photo? Is it a ground photo? Is it a, rendering? Those kind of things are pretty easy for me to figure out. And then just kind of looking at each image specifically, I can usually tell how it falls into our predetermined set of keywords. And if I'm ever not sure, I can go back and, edit it later, ask the project manager. But typically it's pretty easy for me to figure out, but I have been doing this for a while, so I don't know if that plays a part in that. I don't know that you would maybe want someone brand new being the one who actually enters that information in. I think it does take someone with a little bit of background knowledge of the industry and the types of things that you want tagged.
Yeah, I'll add to that just real quick too. I think that's a great point to make, Karen, that like within OpenAsset, you can layer the project level data, so you can narrow down to maybe all your education projects and then do AI visual search. That way you aren't searching the entirety of it. You're searching kind of the focus content for the work that you're working on. The other thing that I always remind internal teams to speak to externally is, if you have 10,000 images in your OpenAsset system, your goal is not to find one. Your goal is to narrow 10,000 to 500 or 10,000 to 200, and you layer data to a small enough subset that you can then find that content. If your search returned one file, then either it's broken or you had a very, very, very specific thing to find. But I think, when you are working in technology, the goal is not to go from 10,000 to one, it's to 10,000 to a smaller subset where you can quickly scroll without having to click into folder structures that you would have to do on a network drive. I'll hand it over to Chris to see if there's any questions.
I've got one more question. I think we have time for one more.
Yeah.
If we're having this conversation, Schmidt, 3 years from now, like, how is project storytelling and project data different? Like, what's next for you guys? Like, what are your hopes and dreams in terms of project data and stories?
I think if I had to pick one thing, it would be that the project data is more robust on projects that are not key projects. So that even just reporting is a lot more robust too. So that personally, as a data person, that's what I would like to see.
Yeah, I guess I hope, having used other systems unsuccessfully in the past, that our people stay engaged at a level where it keeps the information in the system relevant, right? So just keeping it fresh, keeping people engaged at a social level, as well as trying to get the information that they need, I think is the key to being able to do that. So just keeping it all going, I think, is key.
Karen, you're the closer.
I would probably say just getting people familiar with all the AI functionality of both programs. I think it's going to be a huge thing in the future, and just the more comfortable that you are with what it allows you to do, the better that you'll be able to do your day-to-day work.
Awesome. Nice job.
Yeah, that was a great close. With that, we are at time. There are a few questions left unanswered. We will follow up with the attendees that asked to make sure those get answered. Very, very much appreciate everyone taking the time out of your busy days to join us today, especially the Schmidt Associates team. Chris and the Knowledge Architecture team appreciate the partnership, and very much appreciate everyone joining. I hope you all have a great rest of the day, and be in touch. Bye, everyone.
Thanks all.